Bolivia's movement towards the Socialism Party announces the date it will need to select a candidate for the upcoming elections. Citizens call for the Chilean police chief to resign after horrific repression of protests. And French workers are set to continue their strike into the Christmas week. Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Carla Gonzalez in Quito, and this is from the South. Bolivia's deposed President Evo Morales says his party, the Movement Towards Socialism, or MAS, will meet on December the 29th to choose its candidate for the upcoming presidential elections. Speaking on a radio station in Argentina, where he has been given asylum by the government, Morales said he was calling on members of the MAS to meet next Sunday in Salta, on the Argentinian border with Bolivia, to make their choice. He said the government of Alberto Fernandez will provide security for the event. Meanwhile, the de facto administration in Bolivia has decided to join the Lima Group, an organization of right-wing governments seeking to interfere in Venezuela. This is the latest of measures aligned with the U.S. efforts in the region to topple the government of Nicolás Maduro. Since the coup against Evo Morales, the self-proclaimed president Yanín Áñez has rolled back the progressive policies of the last government. Staying in Bolivia, the de facto government ordered the preventive detention of Evo Morales' cousin on Friday. Luis Solís Morales is a former official in the presidential ministry. He has been accused of involvement in acts of sedition and terrorism based on supposed phone calls he had with the country's legitimate president, Evo Morales. Solís' lawyers said the decision was a mistake based on presumptions. Meanwhile, leaders of the MAS party condemned the decision and demanded an end to the de facto government's persecution, including against Evo Morales.
Popular organizations and the movement towards socialism were part of a unity agreement which became the political and social backbone of the government of President Evo Morales. He now has an arrest warrant against him.
We reject the arrest warrant against our brother Evo, against authorities and social and political leaders. That warrant is an attack on his constitutional rights and those of the Bolivian people, on democracy and freedom.
There were also allegations that the United States government was behind the coup on November the 10th.
We won't allow the interference of the U.S. government under any circumstances. The order to arrest our brother Evo was orchestrated by the U.S. State Department because the coup was also intended to take control of our lithium and other natural resources.
The Unity Pact warned that once the Christmas holidays are over, it might organize fresh protests if the persecution of its leaders continues.
We are on an emergency footing. The protests are ready, the Bolivian people are ready, and we are waiting for the end of the year because we have to defend the institution of Bolivia's plurinational state.
This last week, a group of prosecutors issued an arrest warrant for Evo Morales on charges of sedition and financing terrorism. They asked Interpol to detain him.
The Cuban National Assembly chose Manuel Marrero as the country's prime minister on Saturday. The former Minister of Tourism takes the post as part of a restructuring of the way Cuba is governed under its new constitution.
As established in the Constitution of the Republic, it is my job to propose to this Assembly the nomination of the Prime Minister, who in this case is the comrade Manuel Marrero Cruz.
And President Miguel Díaz-Canel closed this special session by detailing the challenges ahead for the island as the U.S. blockade remains in place.
We have been going through a year filled with challenges, tensions and aggressions. We face them together, and we are winning by being together. Year number 61 of the revolution has been tough, although never as difficult as it was in the first years, when we had attacks, an invasion, sabotage, fires, vandalism, and when they isolated Cuba across our hemisphere. Inspired by the resistance and strength over 6 decades, we have gone through 2019 defeating obstacles that seem impossible. And today, we have the right to celebrate what we have accomplished, without complacency and conscious that each of our achievements is only a new starting point.
In Honduras, relatives are still waiting for the final list of the prisoners who died on Friday night after a riot broke out at a prison. The figure has now risen to 20, as forensic experts in the town of Tela have taken the bodies for autopsies. The latest prison crisis in Honduras began last week when the director of the maximum security prison of El Pozo was shot dead. He was under investigation for witnessing the execution of a former associate of the president's brother, Tony Hernandez, who was convicted for drug trafficking.
We call on the Red Cross to come here. It's not fair that the authorities are still inside and there's no answers. My husband told me that the police were shooting at them. He told me that.
Nicaragua is one of the top 5 ranked countries in the world, according to the Economic Forum's Global Report on Gender Gap in 2020. So let's see how the Central American country managed this achievement.
The policies promoted by the government of President Daniel Ortega have the fundamental objective of the inclusion and active participation of women across different social and political spaces. The Women's Minister, Jessica Padilla, explains.
As an institution, we work directly with women. We work on economic empowerment as well as political. We work for the personal development of each woman, and we do this in conjunction with other state institutions. We can't say that this achievement stems from one ministry. It's the government, and we share the responsibility.
The Minister for National Policies, Marta Ruiz, recalled that through the anti-imperialist Sandinista struggle, women have played a vital role with important responsibilities in order to defend the country. She pointed to the national heroine Blanca Arauz and the internationalist Teresa Villatoro, among others.
In the second stage of the revolution, the equitable inclusion of women has taken an important place. It's about returning rights, because during the 16 years of neoliberal governments, lots of these were lost. At this stage of the revolution, we women in Nicaragua have been able to enjoy our land, our country, and felt part of the process, an important part. If you look at Nicaragua today, we have 16 state ministries, of which 9 are led by women, and that's important.
For the analyst Adolfo Pastran, this achievement goes beyond the number of women in important political roles. Rather, it's about social advances that have been achieved under this administration.
Maternal homes, the reduction of women and infant deaths in childbirth, women in education, young people getting qualification. It's about the recuperation of human and social rights that have afforded women greater power over what happens in Nicaragua.
With the Human Rights Development Plan, 43% of mayors are women, while 57% of vice mayors are women. In local councils, 51% have women's active participation, while in autonomous councils, that figure is 48%. And at the top of the governmental ladder, 50% of ministerial roles are occupied by women.
Football is transcendent in Brazilian culture, so after the break, we'll take a look at a match of a special significance. Don't go away. Welcome back. More news at this hour. Social movements continue to mobilize in Chile, and after the state's violent actions, the Chilean people are now demanding the resignation of the head of the Carabineros.
We've come here to the door of the Santiago authorities building to denounce that public security is in the hands of a psychopath who is using the logic of state terrorism. Yesterday, what we saw employed against protesters in Plaza Dignidad was appalling, as in the case of Oscar, who right now is in a grave condition.
Activist Esteban Silva went on to say that the government of Sebastián Piñera is trying to impede the peaceful protests through state terrorism.
We're here to denounce the government of Sebastián Piñera, who is trying to prevent the peaceful mobilizations of the Chilean people. And that's unacceptable. This is evidence of repressive logic and an act of state terrorism.
And Chile saw new levels of police violence against protesters on Friday evening. Among those attacked by the police was a Telesur crew while going about their professional duties. They had been covering a protest concert in Dignity Square. The lower house of Chile's Congress has approved gender parity, seats for indigenous peoples, and the participation of independents in a bill that seeks to correct the plebiscite already agreed to reform the Constitution.
In Congress, almost everyone is happy, except for the ultra-right wing that didn't want gender parity, nor participation from outside the political parties for the coming plebiscite on constitutional reform.
This is a historical moment of broad unity of the opposition. All of us from the different parties contributed to achieving this.
Today marks a new milestone where the political class was able to agree to define and incorporate within the Constituent Convention the indigenous peoples.
A strategy that for the winner of the National History Prize, Gabriel Salazar, is nothing more than a chess move by the political class, who, faced with the current social movement, is uniting so as not to lose power, designing something that looks like a constituent assembly, but isn't.
It is a move by the Chilean political class in order to anticipate the constituent process that the people or the citizens themselves might carry out by their own means.
That is why it's not called a constituent assembly, but a convention. And it's not just a matter of semantics. The political class, according to Salazar, has moved to get ahead of the people's organization.
They said the conditions, the quorum needed to approve the various agreements, and of course, they say it as a trap. So if the Constituent Convention, as they call it, is established, according to their plan, they will participate, but the participation of independents is virtually excluded, and therefore the Constituent Assembly would be controlled and managed by them.
The former president of the Association of Journalists and a member of the Communist Party agrees with this analysis.
For decades we have been saying that we need a body to discuss the new constitution, but that needs to be a body that is sovereign, with popular parity, which is sovereign in the sense that it is elected specifically for this purpose and defines its own rules on how to draw up the constitution we want.
So what then will Chileans vote on next April 26th? As well as deciding whether or not they want a new constitution, they will supposedly decide who will draft it and how, but under rules already set by the peace agreement and the current Congress. With or without gender parity, with or without indigenous peoples, the options will be either a mixed convention or a constituent convention. The first one will be made up 50% of serving members of Congress, while the other half will be made up of elected citizens who are members of political parties. The second option, called a constituent convention, will be made up 100% of citizens elected specifically to write the new constitution, but the candidates will have to stand as part of political slates, and it will operate with the same rules as the current Congress.
If they play that game, then what should we do? I think that we should absolutely ignore it, because essentially this proposal is a life raft for them. So then, we should establish our own rules of the game with our own power. Let's appropriate the constituent process so that we can decide directly on the constitution and the social, economic and political model that we want.
It's not easy, this prominent historian admits, because Chileans have never been given real sovereignty. But this is path marked out by the community assemblies, which are already working against the clock.
Former Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva and singer Chico Buarque have met with members of the landless workers movement for a football match in Sao Paulo. The game was played at the Dr. Sócrates Brasileiro Stadium in the Guararema region. It was attended by friends of Lula and Chico. Kickoff was at midday local time and it was aired locally and online. Supporters of the former president and the poet and composer arrived at the venue early to show their support. Our correspondent in Brazil, André Vieira, has more details about this match.
We are here at the field of Dr. Sócrates, where today the match between the team of the former president Lula da Silva and singer Chico Buarque against the team of the landless movement will be held. This activity is part of the many that Lula is participating in after the 580 days as a political prisoner. Lula already participated in a festival in the Northeast and in different events in Curitiba and also in Sao Paulo. Now he's here engaging in this, the last event of the year. Let's remember that Lula da Silva spoke exclusively with Telesur, and you will be able to see this interview on the 26th with our correspondent Nacho Lemus, who spoke with Lula on different themes in Brazil and across Latin America. It will be a special interview for Lula da Silva, the Brazilian people and the Latin American people, in which Lula even tells us about some of his plans for the next year. For the time being, we will be watching this match here in Sao Paulo.
That was a correspondent, André Vieira, from Sao Paulo. A group of former Venezuelan military officers who took part in the attempted coup in April are now in detention in the United States for violating their immigration status. One of them, Hugo Parra Martinez, is now in a Louisiana prison. He says they were offered amnesty by the right wing if they turned their backs on the government of Nicolás Maduro. They recognized the self-proclaimed presidency of Juan Guaidó and fled to the United States. They now say they have been abandoned. Still to come, the prospect of dialogue between the government and armed groups in Mali looks set to end. Don't go away.
We are present at every event where our nations are staring. We believe in a new global vision, united in every broadcasting. We keep expanding our horizons and working on a closer and better communication. Now, in Grenada, Telesur, the news source from South America and the Caribbean.
Thank you for joining us again. French unions continue to mobilize against the government's planned labor and pension reforms. Further strikes are planned going into the Christmas week as unions and the government fail to reach an agreement. Reports indicate that over 1 million people have taken to the streets in recent days to reject President Emmanuel Macron's proposals. Meanwhile, yellow vest demonstrations have been taking place for over a year to condemn the further imposition of unpopular neoliberal policies by Macron's administration. Police brutality repressed the mobilization as protesters marked a 58th consecutive weekend of actions. In other news, Hamas has welcomed the International Criminal Court decision to open an investigation into Israel's war crimes. The Hamas spokesman Hassem Kassim said there was overwhelming evidence that Israel has committed war crimes during its occupation of Palestinian land. He called for a quick start to the investigation.
We believe that the International Criminal Court should demand the implementation of this decision and should not allow the occupation to impose its conditions and carry out its tasks in the West Bank, Gaza and Jerusalem. It is time that the occupation is held accountable and punished in all international forums for all the crimes it committed against our Palestinian people.
And the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has applauded the decision by the ICC to investigate Israeli war crimes. Speaking during a special session of the Fatah Movement Revolutionary Council, Abbas said the decision is a culmination of years of hard work by human rights organizations and activists.
After 4 years of hard work, following up and providing all necessary information concerning the occupation crimes committed against the Palestinian people in the occupied Palestinian territories, the court's decision was issued today.
Delegates at Mali's national dialogue process have rejected a proposal by the government to open talks with armed rebel groups. The talks, which were called by President Ibrahim Keita, are part of efforts to find a solution to the country's worsening security situation. Mali has, in the last couple of months, witnessed a sharp increase in attacks by armed groups in the country's northern region. More than 1,400 troops have been killed since September. The presence of more than 4,000 French troops and 13,000 UN peacekeepers has failed to put an end to the attacks. People in Sudan have been celebrating the first anniversary of their protest movement. Thousands gather in Atbara, where the uprisings that toppled President Omar al-Bashir started on the 19th of December last year. Al-Bashir is currently serving a 2-year jail sentence for corruption.
We are reaffirming our cohesion and unity. The revolution was not possible without the unity of different sectors of the Sudanese people, without the youth and the kandakas, without the resistance committees and professionals, without honest political parties, and without trade unionists and workers. It would have been impossible for a revolution or any change process to happen in Sudan.
And still in Sudan, the country's transitional government has launched an investigation into war crimes committed by the al-Bashir administration against minority communities in the Darfur region between 2003 and 2010. The investigation will focus on former military and government officials close to al-Bashir. More than 300,000 people were killed in the region after the government unleashed militias against ethnic minority rebels. They had taken up arms against what they called systematic discrimination of non-Arab citizens. Members of the West African Monetary Union have agreed to stop using the French central bank-controlled CFA franc as their currency. The CFA franc will be replaced by a new currency called the ECO. 14 West African countries have used the CFA franc as their currency since 1948, when it was imposed during French colonial rule. Until recently, these countries were also required to keep 50% of the foreign currency reserves in the French treasury and to have a French representative on the board of the region's central bank.
I do not understand how today, in the 21st century, that still a country we call France controls the monetary policy of our country. The BCEAO, we call it the Central European Bank in West Africa, because fundamentally it is not a central bank that is free. Since we cannot freely fix the key rates, we cannot freely finance our economy without permission from France.
In 2019, China further opened its financial sector to foreign investment with the elimination of various restrictions. The Chinese government says these policies will continue in the coming year.
China is determined to speed up reforms in the finance sector. In the last 2 years, it has already introduced 34 measures to encourage foreign investment in the stock exchange, insurance and banking sectors.
China will make a greater effort to establish a business and financial environment focused on the market in order to have a global competitive advantage. We will reduce even more the list of restrictions on foreign companies, and we will open up even more manufacturing, services and finance sectors.
In 2020, China plans to eliminate all limits on the entry of foreign capital into its financial sector, allowing participation in the stock market and investment funds, as well as in insurance and pensions companies.
At the same time that we keep monetary policies healthy and stable, we are also taking steady steps to accomplish all the measures of opening up to foreign investment. We will expand convertibility in capital markets, improve the free use of the renminbi, and aim to ensure a greater and higher quality opening in the financial sector.
Among the most important measures are the first-ever connection between some Chinese stock markets with those abroad, and the entrance of foreigners to the Chinese stock market, the second largest in the world, with $33 billion in assets.
As I understand it, the Chinese economy is in a process of transformation, and the participation of foreign companies is a step forward. Compared to before, the economy in China is better. Both China and everyone else benefit.
Experts consider these policies as a master move by President Xi Jinping to consolidate the image of a solid country, capable of including others in its alternative proposal for development, just when the world is facing a protectionist offensive by the United States.
Telesur, Beijing, China. And with that, we end our news brief. But remember, you can find all of our stories by checking our website, telesurenglish.net. And be sure to also join us on social media. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.
From here to beyond the south. From here to the Caribbean or further north. Where can I see news connecting the whole south? From Washington. From Mexico. From Caracas. From Quito. From Havana. You can always see the news from a new vision, connecting the global south. Only on Telesur. Innovation, science, the technological breakthrough and its influence in society.